As an enterprise coach, I work with leadership and have responsibility for agile practices. My teams work on constraints, but only on those within their control. This means there's a responsibility gap, and that can be a problem. We've all seen teams that don't have the influence to address broader constraints, keep their heads down, and stay focused on doing their job. So I got my guys together and said, look, we've got a problem. We have constraints and none of us are responsible for solving them. They knew. So we talked about it. They came up with lots of ideas on how to solve this. I had to be more authoritative with the leadership, educate them on being agile, give them a book to read. Finally, they figured it out. They said, there's only one logical solution. We need to do a better job at running retrospectives. Then we'll be able to address these constraints. So they raised problems about retrospectives and we discussed solutions. They said some teams don't feel psychologically safe, so we outlined good practice, including leaders admitting making mistakes, keeping a positive attitude, and agreeing what gets communicated. They said retrospectives every sprint gets boring. We agreed. A good practice is using different question sets and different tones. Visual metaphors can really mix it up. Part of the problem they felt was that there was little progress on the findings from the last retro, so adding more items to the backlog seemed like a low priority. We agreed. We should do it less frequently, if that makes sense. We discussed being remote and how that presents a different set of challenges. They were eager to tell me how important it is to have short, fun, focused meetings, and how we needed to get some great collaboration tools to engage everyone in the conversation. And then we all went quiet. We all knew that running better retrospectives wasn't going to help us address these constraints. Topics like how we manage fixed expectations, predictability, learning, accountability, risk, hard technical dependencies, and performance. These all require broader stakeholder engagement. After some brainwriting and theme development, we had identified 4 fundamental barriers to addressing the responsibility gap. The first is that we only raise constraints within our control. For issues that impact us and aren't within our control, we've learned not to raise them. Secondly, we have little influence to get other teams to change their processes to help us. Thirdly, policies from outside departments such as finance and HR impact us as a team. We all felt helpless, though, trying to address these type of issues. Fourthly, the best practice of splitting accountability was a barrier to teaming effectively. We wanted to be on the same side working together for a joint outcome. Other teams agreed that these were the barriers they experienced, and we were concerned, how are we going to tackle these barriers? The next day, we had an engaged dialogue after some initial brainwriting. We came up with 4 cards that teams can use to engage other teams when they have constraints they want to get resolved. The Empower card, which defines frontline staff have the responsibility to engage teams, including leadership, across the organization to address issues that impact value, quality, and speed in delivery. The Listen card, which means when the team has an interest in how the other team performs their work, both teams have a responsibility to listen to each other and influence how the work is being performed going forward. The Challenge card, which means when the team is impacted by the outside-in influence of functional policy and therefore has an interest in its implementation, the team has a responsibility to challenge and influence its implementation to get better outcomes for all. And the Sharing card, which means the success of both parties depends on collaboration. They have a responsibility to share accountability and build working agreements where both parties are responsible and win-lose together. The 4 cards reminded me of the principles behind lean production. At Toyota, frontline workers are responsible to pull the Anton cord to stop production and thereby amplify the signal about the risk to quality. The mandate of management is to go see. The worker is first thanked by the Scrum Master from the CEO for giving the company the opportunity to improve. This changes the relationship between frontline staff and leadership. How do we mimic this model in the service delivery environment was the question I asked to the team. How could we use the Empower card to create the appropriate management responsibility to go see similar to an Anton cord? We felt we were on the right path, but still had many questions. I was pleased that our leader could join us. We summarized our learnings to her. We told her that we discovered a gap in accountability for broader constraints. We'd identified 4 cards to be used by teams to resolve constraints that limit effectiveness and impact. Then we discussed how leaders can have a critical role in supporting the staff resolving these constraints, and how the Toyota's lean production model gives us a set of principles that we can apply to service delivery. We told her about the online platform that we'd found called Janus that had a set of facilitation tools. The role of what they call integrative retrospectives is to include constraint identification and resolution that's focused on systemic challenges. Using the tools, teams work through a series of activities. Firstly, you gather data. You can use the right mix of brainwriting and in-person dialogue to engage conversation to spark more ideas and build a shared understanding of the ideas raised. Secondly, you can build out insights together, using techniques like grouping for bigger ideas, aligning with themes, topic prioritization, voting and scoring on different dimensions. Thirdly, you can identify actions and build out your plans, prioritized for immediate action. And finally, negotiate working agreements. When you identify constraints that are not within the team's control, then you need to work separately on those agreements with stakeholders to remove those constraints. Raising a constraint is the equivalent of pulling the Anton cord, thus communicating to leadership and the organization that we have an issue that impacts the future quality of delivery. The process of building this agreement can involve 5 stages. Setting the table, that includes gaining buy-in for the process. Sharing perspectives, that entails storytelling, perspective taking, understanding timelines, active listening. This helps ensure stakeholders can be heard and understood for their perspectives. Clarity on issues. This includes taking time to explore the issues, building a joint problem statement together. Exploring options through brainwriting, prioritization, and the start of drafting an agreement. Mutually acceptable agreement, to make sure that the core interests of the parties are represented and to establish the fact that an agreement is better than no agreement for both parties. Thus, teams and leaders use integrative retrospectives to remove constraints and continuously improve value delivery. Our leader was happy to learn about these cards and felt that this would really help connect leadership with the front line. She was curious about the tools, how would they help, and then invited us to have a conversation with the leadership team in the next week. After the meeting, we sat down as a team to agree the next steps, to gain buy-in from leadership for their support, to encourage teams to use the Empower, Listen, Challenge and Share cards to engage them in removing constraints, to start a series of small experiments with these ideas to see how removing constraints would release more agility, and in parallel start working with the integrative retrospective tools at community.janus.com.